Well, I don't know how the hell they're feeling in Philadelphia right now because I don't know that game necessarily instilled a ton of confidence in me and the Philadelphia Eagles, but give them credit. Saquon Barkley has been a home run addition to that team.
Yes, he has. Sheesh, what a difference maker.
But they didn't need him in New York. Nah.
They didn't.
We're good.
They were not a Saquon Barkley away from winning in New York.
That's true.
They're a Daniel Jones away from away from a Daniel Jones away from winning.
Damn.
It is what it is, but they're trending in the right direction, man. The Eagles are trending in the right direction. For the Commanders, they're a formidable team. They're heading, actually, even after looking at them losing, I think they're trending in the right direction as well. They just have to learn how to finish games. And they might be a receiver away from being able to set themselves apart to be that next tier type of team. But I give Dan Quinn a lot of credit. Cliff Kingsbury, give those guys credit because they do have this team going in the right direction. Like the score, I don't think is indicative of how that game was played. So when you look at the totality of what took place in last night's game, that was to see who in many ways defining who is the dominant team in the NFC East. And I think it still has that look and that feel that Philly is big brother to the Washington Commanders. And so Dan Quinn and company are going to have to continue to address those feelings and address that approach or the understanding that Philadelphia believes no matter what the scenario is, that they're a more superior team than the Washington Commanders.
It felt like it was two different games last night. There was the game, and then there was the game following Washington's decision to go for it on fourth down and not kick the field goal.
It was, that was a very critical play.
I don't get it.
I'm
sorry.
The thing about it, Jonas, is let's see you execute in a way where at least we can say it was a bad call or it was a good call. Game is on the line, and you could have taken the lead, right? You can take the lead with the field goal. It's a 1-point lead if they kick the field goal, correct?
Yeah.
And he bobbles the snap and isn't able to run it for the first down. It was just – that's a tremendously bad break for the Commanders in that moment because it was probably the most critical, most pivotal moment turned into that type of moment for the game because it ultimately that was like the okay, if they don't stop them on offense, well, if the Commanders on defense doesn't stop the Philadelphia Eagles on them being on offense, it totally changes the game. You got to hold them to a field goal. And now you got to score a touchdown. I think there was like 7 minutes or so left when this happened. I think it was a deflating moment for the Commanders. And while the defense played at, to me, a high level, what's the kid's name? Luvu? Is that how you pronounce it? Luvu, number 4 on defense. He's a beast, bro. The linebacker on their team, he's a beast. Bobby Wagner has, he's a productive football player, Hall of Famer, but they need another pass rusher, and they need a younger linebacker.
I mean, you still got it. Why don't you get out there?
No, I came limping in here this morning, like I had a freaking ingrown toenail or something.
Hey, you don't even want to know.
It's hurting again?
Well, it's just, I don't know.
It's nagging you?
Going on. Yeah, just nagging. So
that's age.
trying to do these open toe, slides. Which, by the way, they got these at like a Marshalls for $12 like 3 years ago.
Never seen you in those.
There's not a lot going on.
You look like Bobby Orchids right now.
Do I really?
Yeah. All you need is a robe.
Where's my bottle of water and the free towel on the way out?
Yeah, there you go.
But nonetheless, the decision for the fourth down call by Dan Quinn and company, the head coach of the Commanders, spoke about that following the game.
Obviously, to go for it and 4th down and 2 at the 26. Bold call, but I would also say we were prepared for that moment. Don't love the execution, but we've been an excellent 4th down team. So going into it, we knew we'd have to take our shots against a tough division team on the road, and we thought that was an appropriate one. Certainly don't like the execution and the result, but we were prepared for that and being bold into those moments, knowing we'd have some 4th downs. But that's one we can fix.
I don't know. I just, in that moment, neither offense has really been able to get in the end zone. Like, Philly's got issues with their kicker because Jake Elliott was just, just wide left all night long. I just felt like in that spot, in that moment, kick the field goal, you go up by a point, and then just rely on your defense again. And it felt like all the momentum went to Philly's direction, and they just stomped them out from there on out. Like, the game wasn't close after that. And
another thing that I find interesting about these games that we're watching, you really could call a penalty every play. Really could. And it's crazy because it's like these players are being held to a standard of playing the game a certain way. But generally speaking, it's by, I guess, timing or interpretation or, whatever it may be, the thought process and the reasoning of these referees when they decide to make a call. Because I saw some really egregious holds last night. I saw some really really, really interesting plays that needed to have possibly a flag thrown. And it wasn't thrown. But in some cases, in other cases, on that same play or maybe something less than that, you'll see a flag being thrown. So I think that, obviously there's human error or flaw connected to how games are called, but I still thought it was a well-played game. I mean, obviously it was a low-scoring game at first. I mean, 7-3 at halftime. That's they were battling. It took until the fourth quarter for them to have that explosion and for Saquon to get going and Jalen Hurts to start finding the receivers, finding some holes in the defense. But for what it's worth, I think that these are two strong representatives of the NFC side and really heading into the playoffs. I think you got to, the home stretch of this season. I think that the Washington Commanders have to learn how to finish games. I think that that's the theme after losing the way that they did to the Steelers and then back-to-back weeks on a primetime game, losing to Philly in a similar manner. And the Eagles have to stay healthy, and their offense is going to go through Saquon Barkley. Sound familiar? That was the theme in New York, and now that's the theme in Philadelphia.
The call I didn't understand, the grabbing of the helmet underneath and pulling it.
And I was trying to understand
it, too. And they picked up the flag.
I was assuming because he didn't grab his face mask. Like
Same thing.
It's not, but is it? I couldn't come up with why they picked it up, because it's almost like if you grabbed him by the back of his pads, that's a horse collar tackle. If you grab him by his helmet and you can clearly see his fingers go inside the helmet, and the young man's head jerks when he grabs the helmet, I thought that was a flag. But again, by rule, I don't know the interpretation of it by rule. So I know he did not have him by his face mask. And when he went and hit him up, like the slap across his head to try to grab him, he did not yank him. It was more of his momentum carrying him. His hands went up in there, and as his hands are coming out, it turned and his hand came out. So maybe they thought by interpretation him releasing his head and not just egregiously grabbing him by the helmet and yanking his neck and pulling his neck around, that it didn't warrant the call. But again, that's a part of the list of calls. It's like that was a critical play.
Yeah, it's 15 yards.
And it turns into what, a second down? It was a first down play, I believe. It turned into a second down and 7. And I still think they ended up getting the first down or whatever it may be. But, I just think there's a lot of gray area with the way these games are being called, because obviously there are a lot of calls that you see being made that can make you scratch your head. But I think there's even more calls that aren't made that make me scratch my head.
You know what I do like about Philly, though? Like, man, it doesn't matter what that team's done in the past. Jake Elliott, whoever it is, like, you're on borrowed time. You have a bad first quarter, they're going to let you know about it. Like, if they would have lost that game, there would have been a lot of people very upset with Jake Elliott. Very upset, and rightfully so. And I'm not, trying to point to anybody on this show who might have had a vested interest in what happened in that game from a point total standpoint, but nonetheless, that was also an issue for the Philadelphia Eagles. Yeah, I don't know what it is with Philly. I come away from that, and it feels like they're playing in slow motion. Like, offensively, I watch them and I go, what is this? Like, I don't know. And I think, Tony Gonzalez was saying, I think this is the best team in the NFC following the game. I think this is the team to beat in the NFC.
They might be.
I think if they meet Detroit in the postseason, the Lions would annihilate Philly.
I think they match up very well, actually.
I don't even think it's close. I think
they match up well because the one thing that Philly has on their side is that they're physical. And they're physical up front on both sides of the ball, so they can match the physicality of a Detroit. Now the question is who is going to play at the highest level at the quarterback's position. I think that's what's going to define it in the playoffs. That's obviously what it's going to be defined by the coaching and by the quarterback play and who wins up in the trenches. I think Philadelphia has the ability to be able to match the physicality of Detroit. And while I do think Detroit is the best team in the NFC division, there's still a matchup. There are matchup parity, I'll say, balance against those two teams. They have a good running game. They have the ability to be explosive in the running game, and they can establish the run both in the pass and on the ground with Saquon Barkley. They have enough firepower and balance with big play receivers, which you did not see. You saw it glaring for Washington yesterday that if they don't get another receiver, which was interesting that they didn't go for one in the trade before the trade deadline to complement McLaurin. I think that showed up in the Pittsburgh game and showed up in this game. But I don't think they get blown out by Detroit if they play them in the playoffs. I think that's a very good – I believe that is the matchup, in fact, in the NFC side of the bracket.
By the way, I would like to say this. To your point on Washington being able to close out games, let's be honest here. This is a 6-5 football team because if you want to credit them for the win against Chicago – that was more of a gaffe on the Bears' part.
They didn't finish out the game.
And they didn't finish the game because they had that game under control. And in the fourth quarter, they melted down, only to be out-melted down by a meltdown in Chicago.
That's correct.
And whatever the hell happened there on that Hail Mary.
That's correct.
So, yeah, that is something to note when it comes to the Commanders. Yeah, they're 7-4. It's feel-good time in D.C., but it's like, man, like 3 of the last 4 games, not great.
But I think, again, that's more of you're taking this team in the right direction. And while you'll say, the results are certainly there to see that what Dan Quinn brought to the table is of tremendous value, there's still the idea that this team has to grow and they have to develop and evolve into what it is that culturally he's trying to build there.
They're this year's Houston Texans. To where nobody last year saw Houston as like, wow, that's a team that could legitimately win a Super Bowl. They're a playoff team. They're heading in the right direction. They found their quarterback. They've got a new culture. But it's just like there's still more to do.
I'll say they're even in a better situation than the Houston Texans. And that's because of the resume of the head coach. And, while he came up short in Atlanta and had another opportunity, but ended up back as a defensive coordinator, I think his resume as a coach, his understanding as a coach, as a head coach in this league, that experience, I think, sets him apart. No shade towards, obviously, D'Amico, Coach Ryan's in Houston, but I do believe that is the difference, is the experience. I don't know if that was, what they call it, an aberration. I don't know if that was just a moment in time that Houston was the team that they were last year. Obviously, looking at what their not Jaden Daniels, but what C.J. Stroud represented to the Houston Texans last year and how well he played. He's not quite having that type of year this year where he's setting the world on fire. So the idea of it is this a building year for the Commanders, or was this a year where you say, okay, the league needed to catch up and understand what Cliff Kingsbury is trying to do on offense? They're pretty good on defense because of the mind that Dan Quinn brings to the table. And so they had a really good 1 year run at it, but now they've cooled off because there's a book on how they want to use Jaden Daniels, use this offense, and how they're calling the defenses. That remains to be seen, but I will say, being there in person, the feel and the energy of what's taking place with the Commanders is different. So it doesn't seem like there's the pressure of you got to walk into the locker room, walk past little Danny when you're going into the locker room after a half of football or a game played and you lost, and now he doesn't want to shake your hand. He's glaring at everybody walking by and this and that, meddling in anything and everything, like we're hearing about what's going on in Dallas. This is actually an ownership group that is praising and giving a ton of credit to this coaching staff and what they're doing to build this team, and allowing for Dan Quinn to really, really bring that positive energy into the building. I didn't even know, they moved operations out of where the team practices. I think, to me, that is a major piece of all of this. I know we were talking about in weeks past the players complaining about the tours taking place through the facility while they're there working. And while I'll say you shouldn't be paying attention or be distracted by outside, forces and things that are, taking place, there is something to be said about being in an environment that you can call yours, getting your work in, not having distractions, not walking around. Like, I can recall walking around in the building, and all our operations pretty much were in the same building. And I got to be honest with you, it was very distracting at times. I mean, you see some of the people walking in there that's going into the media side or the sales side, and you find yourself walking into the media side and the sales side to walk through in between the cubicles to just say hello to a couple people. Well, maybe say hello to everybody along the way so nobody knows who you're really walking past cubicles to see. There's a lot of things that can be distracting. I'm sure there are people in those tours that are a tad bit distracting when they're walking by as well.
It's the old office trick, If you're working at a place with a bunch of cubicles, you know which path to take to get to the restroom and which path not to take, if you know what I mean.
Well, if you're an employee in those areas,
detour,
and you're getting dressed to go to work and do your job in a facility where there's a couple different ways to get a job promotion, if you know what I mean. You got to make sure that you got to make sure you're taking full advantage. And that's no shade to anyone of that's a very attractive person that's able to do their job. I'm just saying. I will say this. If there was one thing that Dan Snyder got right when he was the owner of the Washington then Redskins, was the people that they were hiring to do them jobs that was in that building, they were not going to lose in a beauty contest. No. I will say that.
His eyes worked, that's for sure.
I think it ultimately got them all, a lot of them in trouble.
Sure did.
When it all shook out. But then it started. You certainly could say I understood why, those things started to take place. People get distracted when you're, you talk about camp eye. You didn't even need camp eye. You didn't even need to live in the world of camp eye walking around that building.